Hello everyone, this is Dialone. Enjoy the viewing. This story begins on a hill, where a young man named Ethan, in the rays of the setting sun, ends his life with a gunshot to the head. But what drove him to such a desperate act? Some time ago, an outbreak of a dangerous and unknown virus swept across the planet. The virus proved highly contagious, and any contact with an infected person almost always resulted in death. In a short time, human civilization was on the brink of collapse. Ethan, along with his girlfriend Emma, who worked as a doctor, fled the city in search of a safe refuge. But on the way, they got into an accident. Ethan woke up a few hours later, when it was already dawn. The windshield of his car was shattered. The passenger seat where Emma had been sitting was covered in blood, and the girl herself had vanished without a trace. Disoriented and suffering from memory gaps, the hero ran to the nearest settlement, loudly calling out his beloved's name, but no one responded. The small town was quiet and deserted, and lonely signs on the rooftops pleading for help suggested that its residents had met a terrible fate. For a while, Ethan wandered among the ruins of a store, when suddenly the sound of an approaching vehicle came from outside. A heavily armed man, after hearing Ethan explain that he had just woken up and didn't know where he was, suddenly opened fire on him. At that moment, an unknown woman came to his aid and swiftly dealt with both attackers. Once the danger had passed, Ethan tried to help his savior load the bodies into the truck and unexpectedly lost consciousness. Sometime later, he woke up in a soft bed. Exploring an old, gloomy mansion with multiple locks on the front door, he found his new acquaintance, May, in the kitchen. After a few questions, it became clear that Ethan had amnesia, and all he remembered was how he and Emma had gathered supplies and left the city to wait out the danger in their cabin in the woods. The young man was certain that his beloved was alive and waiting for him there. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a wall covered with old, yellowed newspaper clippings. Sinister headlines spoke of a pandemic and viruses that Mother Nature had used years ago to exterminate two-legged pests. Amazingly, she managed to wipe out nearly all of humanity in just a few days. Suddenly, the lights went out in the house, and May left the mansion to fix the problem. Ethan hesitantly followed her. In the yard, the very same truck was parked, leaving a fresh trail of blood from its cargo bed, and in the backyard stood a creepy, cobweb-covered, mummy-like creature. Judging by its behavior, it appeared to be harmless. May told him that his name was Myrtal, and then asked Ethan to tinker with the electrical panel. Once the power was restored, she inspected the traps to see if any creatures had been caught. Back inside the house, May firmly warned Ethan not to touch anything, or he might die by triggering one of the hidden traps. Disheartened, he decided not to argue with the experienced survivor. After a hearty dinner made from an unfortunate opossum, May asked her guest, as a form of thanks, to help generate energy, seating him on a stationary bike. After some time, tired from pedaling, Ethan decided to check the storage room, where he found a photograph of a couple, apparently the mansion's previous owners. This reminded him that Emma was waiting for him somewhere in the forest. Ethan wanted to leave immediately in search of her, but May held him back, making him spend the evening playing cards and dancing to old music. She promised that once the sun rose, they would search for her together. However, Ethan didn't want to wait, and as soon as May fell asleep, he stole her car. On the road, he remembered that when he and Emma had left the city, they agreed that if they got separated, they would meet at a cabin by Lake Kendall. That's where he headed. After some time, Ethan arrived at the cabin, but to his surprise, instead of Emma, a woman armed with a child was hiding inside. Ethan barely had time to speak when a large, terrifying creature, a human-plant hybrid, broke into the cabin and attacked them. The hero managed to drive the monster off, but a few minutes later, it reappeared, patiently waiting outside for its victims. Ethan was baffled how the creature survived, since he had smashed its skull with a hammer. Jolene, the woman, explained that after the pandemic, humans in this area had heavily mutated. She then noticed Ethan's cast and learned about Emma and their plan. Ethan said he had seen her just a few days ago, but Jolene replied that she and her son had been hiding in the cabin for over a month, and no girl named Emma had come there. Later, Ethan told his new acquaintance about how happy he and Emma had been together, how the terrible epidemic broke out, and how the people around them seemed to go mad. Emma had been constantly busy at the hospital. where Ethan discovered that the virus was plant-based, as if nature had grown tired of humanity's destructive actions and decided to cleanse itself. Mutated humans were now referred to as the Reborn. After finishing his story, Ethan felt sleepy. As a precaution, Jolene warned him not to touch her son, or she would be forced to kill him, and then left him to rest on the couch. The hero immediately drifted into sleep, where he dreamed of mutants and his own hand, bleeding profusely. Every such dream ended the same way, Emma whispered to Ethan. "Wake up." This time, he awoke to her voice, disoriented, lying in a pool of blood next to Jolene's body. Outside, a zombie-like woman was gnawing on the corpse of Jolene's son, and when May appeared, she shot the creature. But mutants couldn't be killed, so May told Ethan they needed to leave immediately, warning that soon the mother and son would rise again as new zombies. Confused by everything happening, Ethan noticed a birdhouse in a tree and found Emma's phone inside. By this point, May realized that Ethan remembered nothing, not even her. On the phone, Ethan found a video recorded by Emma. In tears, she addressed him, explaining that his amnesia was worsening and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. In the background, a peacefully sleeping Ethan could be seen. Emma began to give him advice, but the battery suddenly died and the video cut off. Ethan cried out in despair, but May calmed him, warning that the noise might attract mutants. Promising to charge the phone back at the mansion, May drove Ethan home. Along the way, they had an honest conversation, during which Ethan learned that May had lost someone very important to her. Passing an abandoned gas station in the deserted town, Ethan suddenly remembered being there with Emma while fleeing the city, when a zombie had attacked her but he had saved her by shooting the mutant in the head. For a brief moment, he blacked out again, but May helped him regain consciousness and reintroduced herself in case his amnesia flared up. Once they reached the mansion, May sensed something was off. With her weapon ready, she cautiously surveyed the yard and found a man named Tom hiding. He bore no ill intent, he was simply looking for food and his wife, who had recently disappeared in the area. May offered him a deal: earn her trust and work for her a little, and she would feed him a proper meal. Tom agreed, and he and Ethan began chopping wood. Meanwhile, Ethan grew hungry. When it was time to sit at the table, May quietly warned him not to eat anything, promising to prepare a separate meal just for him. He doesn't understand why, but decides it's best to obey and tries to suppress the growling in his stomach. Tom shows them a photo of his wife, Franny, explaining that she went missing 10 days ago. He is certain she couldn't have been caught by the Reborn. Shortly before her disappearance, she had said she planned to check an old mansion with electricity, similar to this one, and then vanished. At that moment, Ethan faints from hunger, and Tom, taking advantage of the confusion, grabs May's weapon. He is convinced she did something to Ethan, and he himself feels his strength rapidly draining. It turns out May had laced his food with a sedative, and when Tom lost control, she knocked him out with a blow to the head. Ethan wakes up several hours later to the sound of movement in the house. Armed men, Tom's friends, had entered the mansion, searching for him after he didn't return. May hadn't realized they were inside, so the intruders caught her off guard and seized her. Startled, she dropped a syringe filled with a dark red liquid that had been intended for Ethan. One of the strangers suggested killing Ethan, but Tom regained consciousness and told his friends that they needed to thoroughly search the house. He was convinced Franny had been here, and if he found evidence, May would have to answer for it. Later, on edge, Tom tries to reach Ethan to explain that May is the villain. She drugged them and killed their wives. Meanwhile, one of the men, nicknamed Wolf, became curious about the barn and, noticing May's nervous reaction, went to investigate. Soon, in one of the rooms, Ethan finds Emma's locket. Enraged, Tom storms down to the captive May and dumps a bag of personal belongings once owned by various people. Among them are the beads belonging to his beloved wife, Franny. May remains calm, watching as Tom spirals into despair. Ethan grabs a gun and demands an explanation from May, and she reveals the shocking truth: Emma has been dead for a long time. Then Ethan asks how long he has had amnesia, and at that moment May, with a look of sorrow, tells him that, in fact, he is dead too. At the same time, Wolf discovers in the barn an elderly man connected to a life support system with amputated limbs. Horrified, he He runs back but triggers one of May's traps. A powerful explosion kills Wolf and his companion, whose body becomes food for Myrtle. Tom grabs May's gun to shoot her, but due to a modification, it explodes in his hand. The sight and smell of fresh blood fully awaken Ethan's memories, and he attacks Tom with ferocity. Later, he becomes nauseated, and May comforts him, saying that soon he will forget everything again. In the morning, after a few hours, Ethan wakes up in his bed. As May said, he has forgotten not only the events of the previous night, but also her entirely. Food in the house is almost gone, so they must spend the day hunting. However, a heart drawn by Emma on his cast, which for some reason is now green instead of red, restores his memory. Ethan points a gun at May, forcing her to confess everything. It turns out that at the gas station, he did not kill the zombie with the first shot, and it bit his arm, infecting him with a new virus. Emma loved him dearly, so she hid the wound under a cast so that others wouldn't notice, and to slow the transformation process, she began finding people for Ethan to feed on. They wandered through small towns until they arrived at Kai's mansion. Convinced they were not contagious, the kind-hearted man let them into the house, and his wife and daughter generously set the best table they had. At some point, Kai realized something was wrong with Ethan, but it was too late. Ethan killed and eviscerated the wife and daughter for food, while Emma shot Kai, leaving a deep scar on her cheek. To avoid turning fully into a mutant, Ethan had to consume fresh human flesh every day. This kept him eternally young, but his memory was unstable. They lived like this for many years. Eventually, Ethan realized that May was an aged Emma. She had taken a new name when he stopped recognizing her. Overwhelmed by the horror of this truth, Ethan climbed a hill and shot himself. But, as we know, the reborn cannot be killed with ordinary bullets. The film ends with May deciding to surrender. She kisses Ethan and allows him to bite her, becoming a reborn herself, just like him. Here awaits even more stories. Subscribe, because it's fascinating. See you soon.